Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the Earth Day Every Day webinar series. It is our second week of our spring 2021 set. Hopefully we'll be able to bring this to you in the fall as well, but thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Steve Yorjo. I am the county agent with Ocean and Atlantic counties, dealing primarily with environmental management issues. And we thank you guys for joining us for our series, which is focused on getting information out to everyone who lives in New Jersey and some people beyond on items that they can do or actions they can take at home to help protect the environment and be a little bit more sustainable. So we focus on things like native plants, green lawn care, etc. So we are looking tonight to talk about how you can be good coastal steward. And so we have this evening, Dr. Doug Zemeckis here to talk to us about that. Just want to make sure that everybody's all set and using Zoom. Make sure that if you are joining us tonight, you may need to do an update on Zoom, which may give you a couple of seconds delay in getting started with everything. So please make sure, once you update it, you can kind of get back into the login and join us shortly. We are recording this webinar, so if you missed the first couple of minutes, which is basically me just explaining what we need to do and also doing an introduction, you'll be able to rewatch it later when we send out an email with instructions on how to obtain the video recording and to watch it again. So there will be additional ways that you can see maybe some of the parts that you missed or some of the things that you want to see again in case you missed something. Make sure that if you would like to ask questions that you use the chat box. To use the chat box, you should go to the bottom of your screen or see some buttons on your phone if you're working off of that. You see the word balloon that says chat underneath it. Click on that and you should be able to send a chat to myself directly. Please make sure you send it to me or anyone who's a panelist on this. So if you want to send it to me directly, then I can forward your questions to Doug if you have any questions, or if you're running into issues tonight, you can send those over to us as well. Everyone is muted on entry, so you can't just ask a question out loud. And also you should not be able to turn on your cameras as well. It helps with the connection and also allows the presentation to move a little bit more smoothly. We are also going to be doing a poll at the end of this talk. So Doug, could you just advance to the next slide, please? So we were going to be doing a poll later on, which is a quick survey asking what you thought about this presentation and what you learned from it. And because of that, you're all now participants in a research study for us. So this slide basically is a wall of text explaining the survey that we're doing. And basically you're giving whether or not you want to give your consent for participating in the survey, which is actually the first question on the poll at the end. So the poll will pop up maybe about 10 minutes before the end of the session this evening, as well as a link to an evaluation for Doug as well, which we'll be sending out into the chat. So make sure when you fill out the poll that you hit submit poll at the end. Otherwise, we don't get a recording of your responses. So if you want to participate in that poll, make sure that you give us your consent, answer the questions, and make sure you hit submit on that to ensure that we get the full answers that you're looking for. One of the things we do like to ask people is the Earth Day Everyday programming is put on by Rutgers, by ourselves, but it's also part of our Environmental Stewards program. And our Environmental Stewards program has volunteers being trained to be better caretakers of the environment and to be more sustainable. And then we have them do projects and internships. But if you would like to donate to those projects and internships of the students going through the Environmental Stewards class, I'll include information in the chat for you being able to do so, so that we can continue both this webinar series and also the good work that we're doing through the Rutgers Environmental Stewards class. I'll put that in the chat with a web link so you can actually go to the donation page and include that as well. So thank you all again, everybody, for joining us this evening. This is week 2 of our Earth Day Everyday webinar series for spring of 2021. And we have the pleasure tonight of having Dr. Doug Zemeckis with us this evening. Doug is the Marine Agent for Rutgers Corps of Extension, and he works in Monmouth, Ocean, and Atlantic counties, but really kind of does a lot of statewide issues related to coastal and marine fisheries, aquaculture, as well as coastal resource management. And he's going to talk to you guys tonight about how to be a good environmental steward of our coastal resources and our marine resources for New Jersey. So you guys are going to have a part in helping to protect the Jersey shore that we're all famous for. So thank you so much, Doug, for being here tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, and you are good to go, sir. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction, Steve. Thank you to Steve, Amy, Michelle, and Sal, and others who put on this program. Appreciate the opportunity to contribute a seminar to the Earth Day Everyday webinar series, and also fitting to bring in this topic, given that the Earth is 71% water, to touch on some marine related issues. So tonight I'm going to be talking about some responsible stewardship of our coastal marine resources here in New Jersey. As Steve mentioned, I'm the Marine Extension Agent. I'm based here in Ocean County, but serving Atlantic, Monmouth, but also statewide. So today in my talk, I'll be talking about different ways humans interact with our marine ecosystems and ways we can be responsible stewards near or on the water in our coastal ecosystems. So as Steve noted, I'm looking forward to, even in this virtual format, some feedback and interactions. Wish we can socially distance more from our computers soon and see each other in person, but I look forward to some interaction here during the Q&A period. A little bit about partway between, and then again at the end, I'm happy to take questions and provide additional information as we go through the talk here this evening. But folks are probably quite familiar of our states being known as the Garden State. And if you live here, or folks are chiming in to the webinar or watching the recording from other states, probably are also familiar with, but hopefully orient even more so this evening with the great Jersey Shore that we have here in New Jersey. Over 130 miles of coastline from Raritan Bay and up in towards the city, also New York Harbor, but down along the Atlantic coast and into resources provide a great deal of value to our state of New Jersey, and they're an important part of our social and cultural fabric. For example, they are very important not only for one area is for tourism. New Jersey's official tour guide, travel guide, promotes and calls attention to the value of our marine ecosystems and the beaches for recreational purposes and supporting the tourism industry. It's not just what you see on TV, but some of the wonderful beaches we have from Cape May County all the way up into Monmouth County. Wide degree of recreation for folks in state, but also coming from out of state and around the world to enjoy our beautiful marine ecosystems. And also the resources that we have in these coastal marine ecosystems. Support a variety of also recreational and commercial marine fisheries. Shown here is the homepage of the NJDEP Division of Fish and Wildlife, kind of a repository, a one-stop shop. And if you want to find some additional information on our marine fisheries, that's finfish and shellfish, as well as crabbing, which is actually the most popular recreational fishing in the state. But we have number 6 state in the country, actually, in the value of our commercial fishing and seafood here in New Jersey, behind some bigger states that are even better known for their fisheries, like Alaska, Washington, California, and Florida. But we're right up there as a major component of the U.S. fisheries, which provide fresh local seafood for here in New Jersey, but also around the world. New Jersey Department of Agriculture has a program at Jersey Seafood. You can get some additional information on the types of seafood that are grown and harvested here in New Jersey, supporting our fresh local markets, but also globally around the world, seafood products that are harvested or grown here. So a great deal of socioeconomic value, cultural, tourism in our coastal marine resources and ecosystems here in New Jersey along the Jersey Shore. So with the great value of these marine resources, it's also therefore critical that us as citizens who are interacting with our marine ecosystems in varying ways are responsible stewards of these marine resources. And we have, like the Environmental Stewards Program, we here in Ocean County have a Coastal Stewardship Program as part of our Barnegat Bay Shellfish Restoration Program. I'll be talking about that a bit tonight, but our 2021 Coastal Stewardship course will be coming out soon. If folks are interested, you can visit our homepage for our Barnegat Bay Shellfish Restoration Program. But with that course, one of the graduates and a long-time volunteer, Ed Barry, who volunteers with Reclaim the Bay in our programs, he actually sent me this paper a few years ago as we were getting more and more common to use the term stewardship in our program. I like this definition where you can think of it as a responsible use, including conservation of natural resources in a way that takes full and balanced account of the interests of society, future generations, and other species, as well as private needs, and accepts significant answerability to society. So appreciate everyone joining us this evening. Probably came with the question of what can I do to be a more responsible steward yourself? And diving into that, these next two slides, obviously right now we're still confronted with the pandemic, but last year and this year, I anticipate a lot of these different organizations, marine programs, nonprofits, university, and other, might have some opportunities to volunteer from the safety and comfort of your home or get out in the field. So just want to provide some indication and overview of one way to become a responsible steward is also to become an active volunteer with a given organization, something that might be interesting to you and be maybe near your home or a place along the coast that you like to visit. I'll be talking today about Reclaim the Bay, one of our partners here in Ocean County. Rutgers, we have Jacques Cousteau National Estuary and Research Reserve, which is in Tuckerton, Southern Ocean County. Volunteers limited with Rutgers University programs are restricted right now during the pandemic, but there's estuary monitoring and citizen science available there. Hopefully maybe later this year. We'll see how restrictions pan out during the pandemic. A couple other ones, American Littoral Society, I'll reference later. They have a citizen science volunteer fish tagging program, volunteer efforts for shellfish restoration, including living shorelines, which we'll learn about later. If you love the kayak, check out the Barnegat Bay Partnership. They have a program called Paddle the Edge, where you can go kayaking around the Barnegat Bay ecosystem and collect ecological data to support their research and management of the Barnegat Bay watershed's resources and ecosystem. Some more throughout the state are shown here. You got Save Coastal Wildlife, New York, New Jersey Baykeeper, up in Monmouth and Middlesex counties, and others along the Raritan Bay and Hudson River watershed. Around throughout the state is NJDEP Fish and Wildlife. Coastwide Clean Ocean Action has beach cleanups. And if you're down in the southern part of the state, there's Return the Favor, working with horseshoe crabs in Delaware Bay, Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. Just a couple of examples. You have the access to the recording if you want to hone in on any of these regions or groups that might interest you. As one way to become a responsible steward is to join an already active program to get involved in something that's of interest to you and to help contribute your time as a responsible steward. So each of these programs are located along the coast, something arguably for everybody in a different location of the state along the coast. And they're also existing in different watersheds. For those who might not be familiar, a watershed is a land area that channels rainfall, snow melt to the infographic where if rain and snow, when they enter the system, they'll eventually make it into streams, rivers, groundwater, and a certain percentage of that will make it into our bays and oceans. And you see the different watershed management areas here on the right. You got 20 different watershed management areas throughout New Jersey. Later on tonight, I'll be focusing in on number 13, which is the Barnegat Bay watershed, which roughly overlaps with the footprint of Ocean County down here in the central part of the Atlantic coast. You might be wondering, we're here to talk about marine resources and stewardship thereof. Why is this guy showing me a picture of the land? But what we do on land impacts the health and condition of our local marine ecosystems, as you see with the watershed, not only natural occurrences such as rain and snow, but also what you do on your property in terms of maybe your home lawn and gardening, washing your cars, some examples. We'll touch on that, but it's important to understand that all of these systems are connected, not only what we do maybe while we're out fishing, but also what you do when you're in one of the local watersheds. You have an impact locally and also further downstream. So an important issue impacting really coastal marine ecosystems throughout the state and throughout the country more broadly is a challenge referred to as eutrophication. Eutrophication, algal growth due to increased availability of one or more limiting growth factors that provides photosynthesis. If you participated in some of the other seminars, a part of this Earth Day Everyday series, either this spring or last fall, back in 2020, probably learned a lot more about native plants more recently, but also plant biology, basics for photosynthesis, sunlight, nutrients, oxygen, But here in the marine context for eutrophication, nutrient fertilizers, for example, on our residential properties, septic tank issues, leaching or aging ones, agriculture and livestock runoff or urban runoff. What we're doing on land has an impact in our marine ecosystems, where what is excess nitrogen and phosphorus entering into our coastal systems. And too much of a good thing could be a bad thing in these instances, where an excess in the nutrients results in large blooms of algae or phytoplankton. And phytoplankton are the base of the marine food webs. They're then food for zooplankton and larval finfish, which grow into older fish that support our wild capture marine fisheries, and also the phytoplankton, the food for the shellfish in our aquaculture. But when there's too much nutrients, there's excessive algal blooms. And when the algae then die, they are then consumed by bacteria, which end up using all the oxygen, or a large proportion of the oxygen in some instances. So you can actually get hypoxia events, where there's not enough oxygen for finfish, or also for the seagrasses that live on the bottom to live comfortably. And you can have large mortality events. You could have increased sedimentation. You see here an algal bloom in Barnegat Bay, the sedimentation in the water from the algae blooms that reduces the amount of sunlight getting down. It can impact the growth of the seagrasses on the bottom. So eutrophication is a major issue as we manage a growing human population, and our impacts on our local watersheds, and then the impacts and results on the resources, from phytoplankton all the way up to larger finfish, are impacted by these nutrient loading processes. Another stressor impacting our coastal marine systems, which is actually related to climate change. Folks are probably familiar, hopefully generally, with climate change, scientific consensus on human-induced exacerbation of climate change, the blanket effect of trapping in the sun's radiation with greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide. Related to climate change is also the interactions of ocean acidification. Approximately 30% of the CO2 released into the atmosphere from human activities since the Industrial Revolution has been actually absorbed by the oceans. When that carbon dioxide reacts with water, produces carbonic acid. And then, I'm not a marine chemist, but this schematic from the Northeast Coastal Acidification Network outlines the major chemical pathways by which then the carbonic acid dissociates into bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. If you remember from high school chemistry, that the pH, or the measure of the acidity of the water, with 7 being neutral, above to 14 being basic, below 7 is acidic. pH is measured as the negative log of the concentration of the hydrogen ions. So the more hydrogen ions, the more acidic the water is. In this case, the average seawater is about 8.1 on the pH scale. And over time, through the amount of hydrogen, reduce the pH more towards the neutral. So we're still not acidic, but it's in highs around 8, 7.9. So percentage-wise, we've already had over 30% increase in the acidity of our marine, coastal marine ecosystems in the water. So this has had an impact on a whole suite of marine life, from the seagrasses to the shellfish to the larger finfish and larval finfish as well. These hydrogen ions then, through this chemical process, also impacts the ability for shellfish, as an example, to form calcium carbonate, which is the shells of oysters, clams, even lobsters offshore. So the ocean acidification presents another stressor on our marine systems and the resources that live within it. And it's also, as I noted, related to climate change, and also could be exacerbated by human influences. This is the ocean acidification process, which happens at a larger scale and worldwide. But also coastal acidification is another issue. And it's a bit of a similar process, but in addition to the atmospheric CO2, like what I mentioned on eutrophication, through human-induced activities, we're seeing an increased loading of nitrogen and phosphorus into our coastal systems. And through the same process of by eutrophication, that also by using up the oxygen in the water, there results in an increase in CO2 from the algal blooms. And you also, through local processes, you get coastal acidification. So ocean and coastal acidification result in reduced pH, which can impact the physiology and the survival of larval fin and shellfish, and impact then the resources that we like to then catch and eat through our fisheries. Obviously, then there are also socioeconomic impacts. So many of the actions you can take to mitigate climate change can also help to mitigate this ocean and coastal acidification process. In addition to the nutrient loading in our practices on land and near the coast, as well can reduce that nutrient loading and help to mitigate some of the acidification we're seeing. So there's multiple stressors in our coastal marine systems. The Mid-Atlantic Coastal Acidification Network, MACAN, looks at acidification issues on our marine systems and resources from Long Island down to Virginia. And they have this schematic here where we have the global stressors that I hit on: ocean warming from climate change, coastal and ocean acidification, there's impacts to stratification and physical oceanography of our systems. We have some more stressors: fishing and habitat loss, pollution and nutrient-caused hypoxias, I mentioned a short bit ago. And then, of course, there is also natural and seasonal fluctuations in these systems as well. So a variety of ways we're seeing stressors and changes in our marine systems, some natural, but also human-induced issues as well. So drilling down to some examples also of, and try to spotlight some of the work and volunteer and stewardship opportunities along the coast. With our coastal stewardship class, we use shellfish as the primary teaching tool, because we can learn a lot about how humans interact with our coastal marine ecosystems and resources by learning about shellfish and the ecosystem services they provide. And they also serve a bit like a canary in the coal mine, so to speak, or where you have a healthy marine ecosystem and well managed, you have healthy shellfish populations. Then also, if you have healthy shellfish populations, they also contribute to their ecosystem services to improving the health of their local systems and waterways. One way they do this, shown here, is an oyster reef schematic from the Chesapeake Bay. Oysters, hard clams, they're filter feeders, feeding on phytoplankton, algae that are in the water to get their nutrients to grow. But by doing so, they are removing some of that excess nutrients, the nitrogen in particular, in the water, and assimilating that into their body mass and respiration as they breathe. So the actual one ecosystem benefit provided by shellfish is reduction in nutrients to the benefit, as we see, to mitigate eutrophication. They also, therefore, through that and forming of reefs, they can reduce sediment suspension, improve water quality and clarity, what helps with some of the photosynthesis of seagrasses. They provide habitat through their reefs for a variety of other crustaceans and bivalves, as well as finfish. And they also provide some substrate and hard sensitive estuarine and wetlands habitats in our estuaries. However, there are also many stressors to shellfish in our coastal ecosystems. We see, well, one of which is disease. There's actually been MSX and dermo disease that have been issues in the 50s, and more recently continuing with dermo, that have had a major impact on the survival of oysters in Delaware Bay, including in Barnegat Bay and along the Atlantic coast here in Ocean County. You can have through fishing, but disease. You can also have a reduction in the number of oysters out there, which reduces the amount of eggs available and their spawning diversity. Predation, actually blue crabs, oyster drills, sea stars, cownose rays, they are major predators on shellfish populations. The increased silting can actually bury some shellfish, and the water quality parameters in terms of the salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, they need to be comfortable in their habitat, their preferred salinity and temperature ranges to also be productive and survive. So shellfish are a big part of a lot of the different stewardship and volunteer programs in our extension education here in Ocean County, not just with Rutgers, but also American Littoral Society and others, DEP, working throughout the Barnegat Bay watershed. As you can see, much of that watershed, or at least Barnegat Bay here, orange hue, this the 37 bridge over to Tom's River. And I'm in our Ocean County Extension office right here, right now, delivering this talk to you all who are probably throughout New Jersey and beyond. So looking at the state of the Barnegat Bay watershed, the Barnegat Bay Partnership is involved in a variety of research and education and monitoring of the Barnegat Bay watershed. A bit dated now, but the most recent State of the Bay report came out in 2016. Helps guide a lot of the research and monitoring that goes on to help improve the quality of this very stressed ecosystem, as there's been increased urbanization and development even down here in Ocean County in the last 40, 50 years, has major influences on the health and status of Barnegat Bay. You can see a cool about 12-minute video if you want to go to YouTube on that points out some of the key findings of this report and how they collect these data through research and monitoring. But wanted to draw attention to a couple of those key findings. So this is back in 2016, but the issues that were identified then have driven a lot of the research, monitoring, and education that has happened in the last 5 years and still working on these important issues. One of them is nutrient loading. You can see as we hit on eutrophication, nitrogen and phosphorus loading from excess runoff and human interactions is a major issue for Barnegat Bay watershed. These speedometer type figures from severely degraded to very good, comparing it to other watersheds throughout the country. We're below average, unfortunately. We have a nutrient loading issue then in 2016 and continue to try to manage that here in Barnegat Bay. They compared from 1989 to 2011. Estimates showed an overall increase in nutrient loads over that time. So struggles would remain with balancing human use and development throughout the watershed and mitigating these nutrient loading impacts. And these also got a degraded score in terms of the algal blooms. We saw before in eutrophication, how these nutrients could then provide the nutrients needed for algae blooms, which then results in hypoxia and reduced nutrients and water quality and clarity. We saw before of some of those issues on the ecosystem and the resources. Additionally, I noted before of how important a role in ecosystem services provided by shellfish, whether it be hard clams or oysters. Also, we have rib mussels and bay scallops and some other shellfish in Barnegat Bay. But looking at the shellfish resources in that last report, they were in a degraded state, whether it have been disease, over exploitation from historical and contemporary fisheries. Many stressors also on the shellfish population where they're in a degraded state. One example, the NJDEP Division of Fish and Wildlife assesses the hard clam population periodically. When they compared the hard clam population in Barnegat Bay from 1985 to 1986, and then again in 2011, there was a 23% decline over that period alone, let alone if you look back further in time. So a great deal of loss in the resources that are available, not only for our fisheries, but also that loss in the benefits from the ecosystem services they provide. As a result, to combat these water quality issues and the shellfish restoration issues, one of the groups that we collaborate with here closely, a volunteer organization, Reclaim the Bay, partnering with our Barnegat Bay Shellfish Restoration Program through Rutgers Extension. It's been active since 2005, initiated by my predecessor in this position, Jeff Wimlin, to help educate and empower citizen scientists to get involved in initiatives focused in on shellfish that go towards meeting restoration efforts, but also improving ecosystem health and learning other principles of stewardship along the way. So one of the key collaborations and activities as a part of Reclaim the Bay and our collaborations with Rutgers Extension includes volunteers growing hard clams and oysters, which are then, once after the growing cycle, are planted in the bay, sometimes available for harvest or out there to reproduce and help enhance and potentially restore local shellfish populations, all the while also providing those ecosystem services, water filtration, habitat provision, and also food for predators. So our coastal stewardship class educates the citizens on shellfish biology, restoration, and aspects of ecosystem ecology, estuarine ecology that we're learning about tonight. We then get seed clams and oysters from commercial aquaculture hatcheries in ocean Atlantic counties. Those seed are grown in upwellers, which are land-based nursery systems. I'll show you some more photos in the next slide. Volunteers maintain the shellfish over the course of the summer, plant them in the fall in the bay under predator screens to keep them protected until they're old enough. And then their previous year's crop, so when they're about 18 months old, they're planted out in the wild under guidance from the NJDEP Division of Fish and Wildlife in locations that they can help build on other initiatives going on in Barnegat Bay to help restore the wild population. And then there's the screens putting down to protect them in the fall. See a couple more photos coming up. But this is a real community citizen science approach where there's a lot of philanthropy and donations and private fundraising to pay for the seed and shellfish that are grown. Space is donated by marinas and yacht clubs and parks throughout Ocean County. Volunteers are educated by Rutgers, and they do the labor and empowered by the education from ARB and other programs to raise the shellfish that then go into the ecosystem with the guidance from the NJDEP to help promote and improve local ecosystem health. So these are the upwellers. There's 11 of them throughout Barnegat Bay. So this is a great opportunity to get active. Last year, there were still some socially distant COVID protocols in place for action for citizen science, and hopefully if that organization can continue again this year and others with similar programs, hopefully there'll be some safe and responsible ways again this year as we continue to confront the pandemic. But these upwellers are throughout Ocean County. They pump in the seawater, or the bay water, excuse me. The shellfish are in the silos. These are about 35,000 small hard clams, baby hard clams there. So the water actually gets pumped in from the marina or the park where these are along the coast, and it upwells from the bottom up. And these filter feeding shellfish feed on the natural water. Water flows out at the top of the tank, and it's constantly flowing with the pump. And the seed eventually is then at about this size planted out on our research lease site. We have one in Waretown and Island Beach State Park where the clams are planted on the bottom. They're covered with predator control screens to keep those crabs and rays and birds away from them until they become about 18 months old. And then we plant them out in the bay to enhance and restore local populations. Another component, an opportunity for citizen science volunteering, is Reclaim the Bay, American Littoral Society, the Nature Conservancy down Delaware Bay. I mentioned before the partnership for the Delaware Estuary as well on the Delaware, New Jersey side. Have a variety of projects involving living shoreline with climate change and expansion of warming of the waters, expansion of the ocean waters. We're seeing sea level rise, which is increasing the rate of erosion in a lot of our marshland, wetlands. One way to combat that naturally is producing living shorelines. Here's an example here with, this one's actually taken from Virginia, I believe. But this is a citizen science initiative with shellfish, shell bags, oyster bags, set up to help create a breakwater, a natural breakwater to protect and stabilize the shoreline. Jersey get oyster larvae that are set on oyster shells that are in shell bags, as you see here, some Reclaim the Bay volunteers. And this forms the basis of this type of a living shoreline to provide a natural option to help mitigate erosion as we confront sea level rise, but also uses such as boat use and boat wakes that have an issue on the erosion of our coastlines. And as Steve, who welcomed me this evening, we sometimes say, I kind of handle from the waterfront out to 200 miles. And he spends a lot of his time also thinking, as well as Amy and Michelle that help organize this program, but thinking what also we can do on land. And I'll refer you here to some of the other talks in this series, but also some guides including what I need to do for my home here in Ocean County, which helped me prepare for this talk, but ways we can also be more responsible stewards at home, not just on the water or near on the waterfront with working with shellfish, but as we saw with the nutrient loading issues, what types of fertilizers we use, the amount, the types of plants. Native plants are native and adapted to the local area, have longer root systems, which are better adapted to survive and mitigate erosion of the local soils. So Jersey-friendly yards is a great resource, and including for here in Barnegat Bay, low maintenance landscaping. So a lot of the principles you might have learned in previous or upcoming seminars in this series also have great benefits for considering the impacts downstream and how you're interacting with and what you're doing on land ultimately impacts our marine ecosystems as well. And this poor guy from this Clean Water, New Jersey, he's been shown here being an irresponsible steward of these comedic infographics, but consider, like I just mentioned, the amount and types of fertilizers that you use on your land, given that it's all connected with the watershed aspects. Another example is how you wash your car, how frequently, where you wash it, and maybe what types of soaps you select as well. So some examples there of ways you could be a responsible steward on near the water in terms of your practices at home and citizen science efforts throughout the state. And I'm going to do a quick time check, and plan is happy to take a few questions here, Steve, and then I can continue with the last third of my talk on fisheries issues.
Okay. So thank you, Doug, so far. We do have a question from Olivia. She was wondering, she has seen a lack of shells on the beaches and in the area around Cape May, and she was just curious as to what might be responsible for something like that.
Oh, good question, Olivia. Probably what's happening there is not in our estuaries, but happening, in our nearshore and offshore waters. Probably more accustomed to seeing surf clams on the beaches. In one hand, there's the human interaction there, where humans are taking them home, or there's a lot of raking of our beaches, which has its own impacts on our beach ecosystems. But also there's been that people search for. That's a great species that's already been quite impacted by climate change, that their distribution of surf clams has shifted quite a bit further east offshore and to the north away from New Jersey. We still have high numbers here, but not as high as they once. Storm in the early 90s that for miles and miles along most of the New Jersey coastline, there were piles of dead surf clams along the coast, and people haven't seen them in those numbers since. So there might have been a large event back then, but also warming of our coastal marine waters has impacted the productivity of that resource, also then impacting your ability to find shells on many of our beaches, at least for that species.
All right, thanks so much, Doug. Doug, I will just point out, you had mentioned the Barnegat Bay Partnership State of the Bay report.
Yes.
That is a report that's done every 5 years, so your timing is pretty good. So because this year is the 5th year since the 2016 report, so there will be a report done hopefully by the end of the summer that will update the information that you had presented. So we'll have some stuff over there. So
fantastic. Thanks for that addition there, Stephen. We'll consider how well some of these programs might be performing, and hopefully for showing an improvement.
So one of the questions that just came in was talking about the Cape May shortage of shells, but somebody was wondering if dredging could be a possible cause for the loss of shells, either there or in other areas along the shore.
I presume, well, when they fish commercially for surf clams, they use a hydraulic dredge to harvest them. But I presume in this case, they're talking about dredging the inlets, maybe as to keep the channels navigable. I would say that that's having an ecological impact, and that's evaluated very in depth when any of those programs are done by Army Corps of Engineers or others. But the current distribution in contemporary times of surf clams, if we're focusing on that species, they're further offshore from where we're seeing the dredging of our waterways. But that will nonetheless have an impact if you're talking about dredging of the intercoastal waterway and some other channels that are done in our estuaries. Department of Transportation and others, they are interacting with and has to be reviewed by the Bureau of Shell Fisheries at NJDEP, and shellfish habitat and abundance and are heavily considered and when evaluating those projects.
Okay. All right. Somebody also asked, with all the work that you've presented so far, as the living shorelines, et cetera, is there any way to get some information on how well those programs are working, or those projects are working?
Yeah, so that's each project has varying levels of monitoring that are involved. Some like a great project is the Tuckerton Reef Site, which is a collaboration led by Stockton University and a suite of other partners, including local shellfish growers. They're doing similar types of restoration work, and they're frequently monitoring, including a lot of undergraduate students from Stockton, monitoring how well this shellfish are surviving and growing, monitoring water quality parameters there. Also in collaboration with DEP, the Bureau of Shell Fisheries, looking at restoration work that's being done in the Mullica River, seeing how those populations, those efforts. Steve mentioned the State of the Bay report for Barnegat Bay, since focusing in here in Ocean County, but that report coming out later this year will evaluate a lot of the health of the ecosystem, the watershed, but also probably the performance of some of these.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. Doug, I think we'll move on from here, but if anybody has any other questions, feel free to put it into the chat and send it my way. If you need to find the chat, it's usually on the bar that's on the bottom of your screen or the button on your phone. Click on the chat, and then you should be able to just type in your question and send it off to me. So, but thanks so much, Doug. But go ahead and keep on going.
Cool. Thank you, Steve. And thanks for the interesting questions, folks. And I'm going to dive into now. That was a little more than halfway there, about a third left, but pivoting a little bit. Also, as Steve noted earlier on in the introduction, that in addition to coastal marine resource management and marine environmental issues, spent a lot of time working in fisheries and aquaculture. And I thought for tonight, I would focus in a bit on our marine fisheries here for stewardship practices and principles that are involved with our fisheries management and our fishing industry stakeholders. So I noted before, Jersey, the last report, I think in this digital age and social media, you want updated information within an hour, but these large reports, they only come out every 3 to 5 years as an example. But Fisheries Economics report in the United States, most current available, was published in 2018 through 2016 they looked. But New Jersey's commercial fisheries and seafood were ranked number 6 in the country. So we have very profitable, large-scale commercial fisheries here in New Jersey. Our most valuable fishery is the sea scallop fishery, and then the surf clam, ocean quahog fishery, which are caught by hydraulic dredges. Our estuarine commercial fishery, primarily trap, but also dredges for blue crabs. Summer flounders, number 5 most valuable, and then monkfish or anglerfish down there on the lower right. So in 2016, our commercial fishing and seafood industry had a $2.2 billion value added to the state economy and over 37,000 jobs. So not only providing a high volume of high quality seafood, but also supporting the social, economic, and cultural dynamics of our coastal communities. And also recreational fishing, over $1.2 billion value added. About 1 million anglers participate every year in marine recreational fishing, supporting over 15,000 jobs. And actually, recreationally harvested fin and shellfish also could be considered seafood, as it's harvested not only for recreational value, but with the intent to consume. So also contributing to our local seafood. So just want to give a crash course on some of the science and management that goes into making for sustainable marine fisheries for the economic benefit for the industry and the communities in the state and for seafood production. So the backbone of the science that goes into fishery science and management are stock assessments. So it's basically estimating how many fish are in the ocean. We like to say it's very easy. It's like walking in the forest and counting how many trees there are. But it's actually quite the opposite. It's incredibly difficult. Fish are underwater. You can't see them and they move. So a variety of different techniques to assess the health of the fish, that's fin and shellfish populations. Want to get an idea of how many there are, how old they are, what their reproductive potential is, how the mortality rates from fishing or natural causes, recruitment, how many babies they are. So to boil it down, we focus in on the ABCs: abundance, biology, and catch. Federal, state agencies, NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service being federal, NJDEP, universities do surveys to get an idea of the abundance of animals in different times and places off our coast and throughout the region. Those fish and what are caught by fisheries are sampled to get an idea of their biology. We really need to understand their growth, their mortality, their reproduction, their migration patterns, if you want to responsibly manage a fishery, to get an idea of how resilient they are to fishing pressure. And of course, you want to get an idea of the catch, how many are being caught by recreational commercial fishermen. So by putting together the ABCs and looking over time, you can get an idea of the health of the population, looking at growth and reproduction, harvests and natural deaths of fish dying from old age or predation, disease, types of things we look at in terms of stock assessment. Here's a really simplified, idealized flow chart of then how that science informs fisheries management, where that type of data, the ABCs, are collected: recreational fishing, scientific observations. They go into the stock assessments. The stock assessment tells you what an acceptable biological catch is. So what percent, how healthy the population is, what percent you can harvest sustainably. That then goes through the fisheries management process, federal and state policy, to set catch targets. Fisheries managers then set regulations, closed seasons, minimum sizes, locations where you can and can't fish. So that way the resource could be harvested with to catch the target but not exceed it. And there's a variety of partner programs involved in the fisheries management. In the state level, you have the Division of Fish and Wildlife, managing things like hard clams and blue crabs that don't migrate out of state waters. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission manages fin and shellfish from Florida to Maine. They manage species that tend to stay closer to shore but migrate between states, like striped bass. The New England Fisheries Management Council manages some of our fisheries like herring, dogfish, monkfish, sea scallops. We have the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, which goes from Connecticut down to North Carolina, managing things like summer flounder and black sea bass, all with oversight from the NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service at the federal level. So that's real fisheries management 101. You can do a full graduate level course on either of these topics, but providing an idea of the flow chart and some of the groups that are involved in utilizing and conducting the science to manage our marine fisheries. And we have a lot of challenges, but there's also been quite a few and a lot of areas for improvement. But biologically speaking, this science-based fisheries management has been quite successful in the US. The NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service puts out the status reports, most recently December 31st, 2020, looking at stocks that are overfishing, where the population is being harvested from at a suboptimal rate, or overfished, where the biomass is below the target levels and thresholds. And if you look at our report card in the Mid-Atlantic, we're doing pretty well right now. Bluefish just got added as being overfished. Atlantic mackerel, which spans from here, Cape Hatteras to the Gulf of Maine, overfished and overfishing. But compared to New England, some other areas, our overfishing stocks, we're doing fairly well off New Jersey, biologically speaking, still challenged by meeting a lot of the socioeconomic objectives. But quite a few stocks, 47 countrywide, have been rebuilt. So they were overfished, the populations were suboptimal biomass, and they had been reported by NOAA to at least temporarily or still remain at a rebuilt level. Here in Mid-Atlantic, we've had some success in the past with bluefish until the population is trying to dower more recently, but scup, sea bass, summer flounder, tilefish, butterfish, some examples where there have been these populations were, and hopefully many of them still are, rebuilt from previously low levels. One example is summer flounder. SSB is the alphabet soup of fisheries. That's the spawning stock biomass. That's the weight of summer flounder. In this case, that's estimated from a stock assessment from North Carolina to Maine. New Jersey is obviously a part of that, but you can see the trend in the weight of summer flounder in the Northeast from 82 to 2017. And you can see that there was the fisheries management plan came into play in 1993, 94. and the population responded quite well. The biomass was the highest observed in the, at least looking back to 82, 2000 to about 2010 period. There has been a downward trend recently, but above the threshold, so it's not overfished, but still cause for concern to responsibly manage this resource. And we saw how important it is for our recreational and commercial fisheries here in New Jersey. So just like the State of the Bay report we mentioned before, still to come out, well, it was in progress later this year, but as our fishing season is coming, opening up here with the spring, the 2021 recreational fishing regulations are coming out, but here are the links to follow them later on the marine regulations page with DEP, Division of Fish and Wildlife. Here's an idea for those who maybe are not involved with recreational fishing, haven't seen this before. Those who have been active anglers hopefully know and keep this on hand in their tackle box or in their boat. But you get an idea of the minimum size, the possession limit, and seasons for all the most common recreationally caught fin and shellfish species. Part of that cycle I said before, where we can all do our part when the science is done to inform management to sustainably manage these resources. Then as a recreational angler, it's important to adhere to these regulations to responsibly utilize the resource, take only what you need for personal consumption, or and to otherwise else responsibly release the animals that you or don't intend to harvest for consumption. And another way you can be actively involved is, particularly right now or during the COVID-19 pandemic, the state and the federal agencies have a variety of programs that monitor recreational fishing effort and activity and catch. And those have been impacted under social distancing protocols and other limitations throughout the pandemic and even before. A great way and underutilized resource right now that's being championed for hopefully increased use this year is this recreational saltwater volunteer angler survey by Division of Fish and Wildlife. There's been some instances in the past where this has been used in management and increasingly probably looking in these directions to fill data gaps. But anglers fishing for just about any species in the marine environment, fin and shellfish, after you go fishing, you can visit this online portal. You can share information about where you fished, what you caught, how long you fished, if you're on a boat or off the shore. And these are the types of data that are then considered and go into the data streams for the science and the management. So in addition to following responsible fishing practices, you can contribute to the data collection programs that are in place. Getting down to one or two more final examples here, but also striped bass. It's one of the most common recreationally caught species here in New Jersey. And actually, we don't have a commercial fishery here in New Jersey. Some states do, but it's only recreational here. So this is a similar type of figure from the stock assessment, which estimate how large the population is, the spawning stock biomass of females in this case, from 82 to 2017. You see, there was those who might be familiar in the 70s and 80s. There weren't many striped bass around. There was a moratorium. The population responded quite well to those management protocols and probably also improved environmental conditions. Although it has trended downward more recently. Fishing effort was quite high for a while, and the environment that threshold. As we'll see here, here's the commercial fishing catch along the coast in millions of fish in blue. The recreational landings, so this is not just New Jersey, it's assessed from North Carolina to Maine. The red is the magnitude of recreational landings, what people bring home. And so recreational anglers on the beach and party boats, private boats, but then recreational release mortality. Through the stress and injury from fishing, estimate that 9% of striped bass die after being caught and released. And as you'll see, actually, recreational fishing is very popular. A lot of people are fishing along the coast and they release millions of striped bass throughout the Northeast, whereas even at striped bass are estimated to die from catch and release and ultimately dying from stressors or injury as that are brought home. So an important component to trying to now manage this resource, which is overfished, is educating anglers on responsible fishing practices. One of which is there's a new regulation that anytime you're fishing with baits in New Jersey and throughout the Northeast, you have to use a different style of hook. A J hook is shown here, which is you're no longer able to use when you're fishing for striped bass in New Jersey or the Northeast. The J hook, as you see the barb, is parallel with the shank of the hook. When that hook is in the mouth or the esophagus of the fish, it's more likely to grab deep down. The circle hook with the barb pointed back at the shank has been shown in a lot of studies to more frequently hook the fish in the lip, which reduces the amount of time on the water to unhook and handle the fish, reduces stress, and in many instances, also their survival. So there's some YouTube videos and information here from Fish and Wildlife as this new management measure went into play for 2021.
Excuse me for 1 second, Doug. I'm just going to interrupt so I can launch the poll for everyone.
Cool.
So I'm going to launch the poll. Please fill it out as you listen to the rest of Doug's talk, and make sure that you click on submit the poll to us to ensure that we get your answer. So sorry for the interruption, but feel free to go ahead and continue on, Doug.
No problem. Thanks, Steve, and appreciate the feedback on the poll and then the teaching evaluation Steve will put in. I'd like to say it's a unique opportunity where you're not grading instead of you being graded, there's no test, you get to grade me in the program. So we're looking forward to your feedback to improve this and my future talks and my teaching. So just one other item here, I get increasingly asked about purchasing seafood. Some of the shellfish and finfish that are grown or harvested under these and here locally in New Jersey, following these strict and in many cases biologically successful fisheries management programs. So NJDEP with the Department of Ag and myself and Lisa Calvo at Rutgers have the Support New Jersey Seafood tool. You can check it out. We are trying to spotlight markets, restaurants, pickup locations as examples where you can purchase locally grown or harvested New Jersey seafood. If you have a local spot that you like to go to and you don't find it on this tool, please let us know or send them this link so that way they can get connected. There's a form there so they can get connected. If you people also ask, like I'm at work, I tend to say I spend most of my time with animal. Look at seafood issues for once they get processed to a dinner plate into the human stomach. But a great resource is this Noaa Fish Watch program. You can type in just about any species in there. It gives you information, everything from diet, but it also speaks about the health of the resource, the sustainability, how it's managed. A nice objective resource to get recommendations on seafood. Recommend checking that out. And also Karen Ensley is an educator with our Family and Community Health Sciences Department with Rutgers Extension. Just conveniently last year in 2020 published a fact sheet on considering environmental and health concerns when consuming seafood. So another great resource to try to tie things together here of the health of our marine systems, the value of our fisheries, but then that way we can also enjoy the seafood, which these seafood products help provide food here in New Jersey and around the world. It's also a key component of the reason why folks come down to our coastal counties for recreation to have seafood. They expect it and enjoy it when they're coming down here to fish or spend their vacations. And as we're seeing, not only when you're on the water fishing and in fisheries management, but your practices when you're on your homes, in the watersheds, a variety of different ways we are all interacting with our coastal marine ecosystems and watersheds, and something that we can all do to be more responsible stewards, whether we're in the watersheds or on the water, considering how we interact with and be responsible stewards. So I hope you found the information I presented this evening to be interesting and useful. I look forward to any questions you have while we're still together on the webinar this evening, or if you watched a recording or take down my contact information. Thank you very much, Steve. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Doug. Doug, since I'm pretty familiar with your work, I know you touched upon the idea of sustainable fisheries and what's available for you to eat. I know, in terms of land-based agriculture, there's a huge eat local kind of movement. Are there any resources out there for eating local seafood?
Yeah, Steve, good question. Right now, I would draw people's attention for that as we are trying to expand those types of efforts, particularly during the pandemic, which has really impacted our local industries, fishing and aquaculture. A lot of them heavily rely on institutional markets, restaurants, banquet halls, hotels They've seen an increase in the retail, but not in most instances to make up for the interruption in the seafood supply chain. So this Support New Jersey Seafood, I would refer people to that. And earlier in my talk, there is a New Jersey seafood component to the marketing and promotion from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture. There's some helpful resources there as well, but they haven't had funding for that program in a little while. So many of the resources there are dated, but most of them are still very helpful. So right now, those are the two best resources for Jersey seafood.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One of them was asking, you had mentioned the methods of catching the fish include dredging. And someone just wanted to ask about what were some of the ecological impacts of that style of fishing on, the environment, the marine environment.
Oh, Steve, I don't know if it was my internet connection or yours there, but actually, I caught the beginning and the end. What type of fishing did you say?
Someone asked about the dredging style of fishing and what kind of impact that has on the marine environment.
Yes, a good question. I've seen some of the literature over time. So the surf clam fishery, here's a surf clam and ocean quahaug, and they have approximately overlapping habitats are caught concurrently. Caught by hydraulic dredges, which are quite impressive large fishing dredges, and they actually pump down jets with seawater and clear a bit of the sediment, and then harvest the shellfish in their grates in the dredge. And these shellfish really like sandy habitats. That's where they live. You see a surf clam on the surface there. They usually are burrowed down a bit, but those sandy habitats are naturally very dynamic from storms and even tides. And there's been research funded by Noaa National Marine Fisheries Service as well by the fishing industry to get at that question. And it depends on the type of substrate and where they are along the coast, but that is an important thing that's considered in the sustainability, not only the resource, but the impacts on the habitat on where they try to direct fishing and try to avoid the most sensitive habitats, both off our coast, New Jersey, and all the way throughout the Northeast when they're doing both that fishery and the sea scallop fishery, which uses smaller dredges.
Okay. All right, thank you, Doug. I will just point out that we still have the poll open, so feel free to fill out that, as well as I put in the chat the link to the evaluation that Doug would like filled out as well. They are two different ones, and we do appreciate you taking the time to fill out both of those to help us improve these programs. One of the other questions that came in was that someone was talking about local seafood stores, and they usually have basically just farm raised or wild caught options. Are there any New Jersey specific options in addition or besides those?
No, our seafood will fit into one of those two categories, either wild harvested from our commercial fisheries or raised, farmed from our aquaculture. And our marine aquaculture or mariculture right now is exclusively shellfish, oysters and hard clams. If you heard the chatter before we started this evening, early on, Steve and I were chatting a little bit. Rutgers is doing research to try to diversify the shellfish portfolio there, involving surf clams and bay scallops in the farming in New Jersey aquaculture. And one day we might also, like some other states that are experimenting with macroalgae as well as finfish aquaculture. But right now we have wild capture and farm raised finfish and shellfish.
And so while you were giving that answer, another question came in about, is there any farming of fish in New Jersey? And I'm assuming they're talking about finfish.
No, right now we don't have any marine finfish aquaculture. There are some operations land-based. There's, as Steve and I have done a little bit of work with aquaponics, where if you're familiar with hydroponics or growing plants and crops with water medium instead of soils, but then mixing in fish to the system. There's some finfish, freshwater finfish that are grown at a few aquaculture facilities. We have some hatcheries throughout the state as well that support some enhancement efforts. But right now, in the marine side, we are exclusively shellfish.
Okay. All right, if anybody else has any questions, I think we might have a couple more minutes, just a few more minutes. Please get them in the chat to us. But in addition, we got a question regarding when you put up the pictures of showing people washing the car.
Yes.
So they wanted to know, so if you need to wash your car and the driveway is not an option, what do you suggest? What are some of the options that they might have if they're not washing it in their driveway?
Well, actually, and actually, Steve, feel free to chime in on this too. Spend more time on this, but from what I'll share, and then maybe you can help as well, Steve. But I understand actually some of the, if you can't do it in your driveway, it's better, because a lot of the facilities where you can go the car wash, they have protections in place to help mitigate the nutrient loading and also the pollution that you might not have at home. Is that true, Steve? Is that actually a more responsible option?
So I will say your options, if you're not going to wash it on the driveway, then you can wash it on a vegetated surface like a lawn, something that's a little bit more pervious to allow the water to soak into the ground. That's not, might not be the best for your soil to put a heavy car on top of it, especially when it gets wet. You could be, obviously creating mud and causing some soil compaction. But commercial car washes are a pretty good option. They are required by law in New Jersey to recycle their water. So they actually help treat it a little bit. So they actually do the reductions that Doug is talking about in terms of the amount of runoff that's coming off of them, as well as the nutrients and other materials that might get washed off the car as well. So that is a viable option as well, using a commercial facility.
Thanks for the assist there.
Okay, no problem. We did get another question come in, if you have another minute or so. Somebody was asking about the environmental impacts of any sort of fish farming in New Jersey. They've heard, for example, that salmon and shrimp farms are not favorable towards the environment, but how are the ones in New Jersey doing, and what are their kind of environmental impacts?
Yeah, we don't have fin fish farming here as a few moments ago in New Jersey. Our shellfish aquaculture, I didn't include that tonight, but have slides of all the responsible stewardship practices that our local shellfish farmers practice on their shellfish farms. We saw the ecosystem services provided by shellfish, and that's if they're wild or if they're growing on farms. They may reproduce, but depending upon the types of, and help also enhance the local populations, but they're providing habitat, even if they're in their cages. They're filtering the water as they're growing food. They have a variety of permits and siting that's done from multiple bureaus by NJDEP, as well as the Department of Agriculture, to make sure they're mitigating, and in many cases, maybe even providing net ecosystem benefits by this ecosystem services provided by the shellfish. More broadly, when we look into maybe in the future with finfish aquaculture in New Jersey, we're doing some pilot work in other states, particularly macroalgae. But the responsible aquaculture practices that we see on land in the US and some finfish aquaculture in other states are really heavily regulated and much more responsible. And we're working on a project right now looking at consumer perceptions of aquaculture products funded by the USDA. And one issue with aquaculture is there's a lot of misinformation from practices that are no longer in place, that were maybe done in the 80s or so when they just started fish farming in the US or actually in other countries, and have really since become much more responsible, particularly from the countries where we source the majority of our, hopefully our farmed seafood from other countries, and where we have production here in the US.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in. So I do want to thank everybody for participating tonight, giving us your questions and participating in the poll. And I especially want to thank Doug for his excellent presentation tonight and letting us know how we can help protect the Jersey Shore and to be a good coastal steward. We do have the recording coming out in the next day or so. So be on the lookout for that, and you'll get information, including Doug's contact information, the information on all the organizations he mentioned earlier. And we will make sure that you guys get that. So I will go ahead and stop the poll right now. Doug, we're getting a lot of thank yous and excellent jobs in the chat. So good job. So I will stop the poll and we will stop recording. And I just want to thank everybody. If you are interested in the other Earth Day Every Day webinars, next week, we have our Deer Management webinar coming up from Gene Huntington, who will be talking about various ways that you can deal with deer management. And I know we always get the question, what plant can I plant that deer will not eat? So feel free to give Gene that question. It all depends on how hungry the deer are, but learn next week on different ways that we can manage deer within the state of New Jersey. So thank you all. And please join us next week, next Monday, and every Monday through April for the Earth Day Everyday webinar. So thank you guys so much.